A poor single mom falls asleep on a billionaire's shoulder. What happens next will shock you. What happens when a desperate single mom, fleeing a violent past, accidentally falls asleep on the shoulder of a disguised billionaire during a turbulent flight? You might think you know how this story goes, but his decision to help triggers the very danger she ran from, leading to a shocking confrontation that neither of them saw coming. Find out what happens next. Subscribe, like, and listen to the full story today. The flickering neon sign of the Starlight Motel cast a sickly green pallor on the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. Rain lashed down, blurring the already grim view from the passenger window of Nathaniel Pierce's rented sedan. He shouldn't be here. A man whose net worth rivaled the GDP of a small nation had no business sitting outside a dilapidated roadside motel on the industrial outskirts of Chicago at 2 a.m. Yet, he couldn't drive away. Through a gap in the grimy curtains of room 12, he could see the silhouette of a woman gently rocking a small child. Earlier, he discreetly followed her from O'Hare, an impulse he couldn't fully explain, driven by a fleeting encounter hours ago. Now, muffled by the rain and the thin walls, he heard fragments of her voice, a low, soothing murmur laced with an exhaustion that seemed bone-deep. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here. We're safe now. Just close your eyes." There was a heartbreaking tenderness in her tone, juxtaposed sharply with the bleakness of their surroundings. He saw the small shadow of the child curl tighter against the woman. This wasn't just fatigue he was witnessing. It was the raw edge of desperation. He'd seen glimpses of it on the plane, the faint, almost invisible scar peeking from her sleeve, the way her hand trembled slightly as she held her son, the haunted look in her eyes even as she'd offered a polite, embarrassed smile. He'd felt a strange resonance, a ghost of his own past stirring uncomfortably within him. Why had she ended up here? The most basic motel, the kind charging by the hour, radiating impermanence and despair. He watched as the light in the room finally clicked off, leaving only the hostile glow of the motel sign reflecting in the puddles. An image burned into his mind. The woman's weary profile, the child clutching a threadbare teddy bear, the sheer vulnerability of their situation. He gripped the steering wheel, a cold resolve settling over him. This wasn't just idle curiosity anymore. He needed to understand. He needed to know why this woman, whose fleeting presence had somehow pierced his carefully constructed attachment, was hiding in the shadows. He picked up his phone, dialing a number he rarely used personally. "Mark," he said, his voice low but firm. "I have a situation. I need discreet information. Priority 1. Just 6 hours earlier, Nathaniel Pierce, 35, had been anonymous, or as close to it as he could get. Huddled under a generic gray hoodie, sunglasses obscuring his face despite the cabin lights, he'd boarded the late-night flight from New York to Chicago, hoping for oblivion. A grueling 3-day tech conference, filled with pitches, negotiations, and forced pleasantries, had left him drained. He craved the quiet isolation of his penthouse, a world away from the demands of Pierce Industries, the global conglomerate he'd built from the ground up. He usually flew private, but a last-minute scheduling change and a desire to avoid the small talk of his usual flight crew had landed him in Economy Plus, window seat 14A. Beside him, in 14B, sat Clara Evans. At 29, she possessed a fragile beauty, thick, dark hair pulled back haphazardly, striking blue eyes clouded with weariness, and fine features that even exhaustion couldn't entirely mask. She clutched her 5-year-old son, Ben, who was already asleep on her lap, his small hand gripping a worn teddy bear missing an eye. Clara had just finished a double shift as a cleaner at one of JFK's contracted services, the low pay barely covering the essentials. The flight to Chicago was a desperate gamble, a flight booked with the last of her meager savings, chasing a vague lead on a slightly better-paying job and, more importantly, distance from a past that constantly threatened to catch up. 4 years ago, she had fled Buffalo, New York, escaping a marriage that had devolved into a nightmare of control and violence at the hands of her ex-husband, Mike. The faint scars hidden beneath her cheap sweater were permanent reminders. Since then, life had been a relentless treadmill of low-wage jobs, constant anxiety, and solitary parenting. The fear of Mike finding them a shadow that never truly left. The plane hit unexpected turbulence shortly after takeoff. The cabin lights flickered, and a collective gasp went through the passengers. Ben whimpered in his sleep, burrowing closer. Clara, already operating on fumes, jolted, her body slumping sideways with the movement. Without conscious thought, utterly spent, her head came to rest gently on the shoulder of the stranger beside her. Nathaniel stiffened, his initial reaction a mix of annoyance and intrusion. He wasn't accustomed to physical contact with strangers. He started to shift, intending to subtly dislodge her, but stopped when he heard her murmur, a soft, fragmented plea in her sleep. "Ben, I'm sorry. I'll keep you safe. Always." Her voice was thick with emotion, a raw maternal protectiveness that resonated unexpectedly. He glanced down. Her face, relaxed in sleep, was unguarded, vulnerable. He noticed the smudge of dirt on her cheek, the frayed collar of her shirt, and then the edge of a pale, thin scar just visible below the cuff of her sleeve. His gaze shifted to the sleeping child, small, thin, clutching the battered bear like a lifeline. A knot tightened in Nathaniel's chest, an echo of his own chaotic childhood spent bouncing between indifferent foster homes after his parents' deaths, the gnawing insecurity, the constant feeling of being adrift. He understood, perhaps better than most, the look of a child clinging to the only stability they knew. He stayed still, letting her rest. When the plane finally touched down in Chicago, the jolt woke Clara instantly. She snapped upright, mortification flooding her face as she realized where her head had been. "Oh my God, I am so sorry. I completely passed out. I didn't mean to." Her cheeks flushed crimson. Nathaniel removed his sunglasses, offering a small, tired smile. "It's all right," he said, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "Looked like you needed the rest more than I did." Their eyes met for a brief moment, hers wide with embarrassment and anxiety, his holding a flicker of something unreadable. She quickly gathered Ben, who was stirring groggily, mumbled another apology, and hurried down the aisle, disappearing into the deplaning crowd. Inciting incident. Nathaniel watched her go, a strange disquiet settling over him. He could have just walked away, retreated back into his privileged bubble. But the image of her vulnerability, the quiet desperation he sensed, and that pang of recognition from his own past wouldn't let him. He saw her bypass the taxi stand, heading towards the bus terminal, her steps slow and heavy. On impulse, driven by a blend of empathy and an insistent curiosity he couldn't shake, he pulled his hood lower and followed at a distance. He needed to know her story ended somewhere better than the transient despair of the Starlight Motel. That decision, made in the sterile anonymity of the airport terminal, set Nathaniel on a path that would irrevocably alter both their lives. The call came 2 days later. Clara was scrubbing the grimy bathroom floor of their motel room, the smell of bleach sharp in the air, while Ben quietly colored on the worn carpet. An unknown number flashed on her prepaid phone. Hesitantly, she answered. "MS. Clara Evans," a professional, female voice inquired. "My name is Sarah Jenkins, from the Pierce Foundation's Community Outreach Program." We received an anonymous nomination recommending you for a potential administrative position within our parent company, Pierce Industries. Would you be available for an interview? Clara froze, disbelief warring with suspicion. Pierce Industries? The massive tech firm headquartered downtown? A nomination? It sounded too good to be true. I don't understand. Who nominated me? She stammered. As I said, the nomination was anonymous. MS. Jenkins replied smoothly. Often, community leaders or former colleagues put forward individuals they believe show potential. The position involves office administration and support, and the salary and benefits are quite competitive. Are you interested? Desperation gnawed at her caution. Her job lead in Chicago had evaporated, leaving her stranded and her funds dangerously low. This would be a lifeline. Yes, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, I'll be there. The Pierce Tower was an imposing structure of glass and steel, a symbol of wealth and power that felt alien to Clara. Dressed in her only presentable outfit, clean black slacks, and a slightly worn blue blouse, she felt acutely out of place amidst the expensive suits and confident strides in the lobby. The interview itself, conducted by MS. Jenkins and a stern-looking HR manager, was surprisingly standard. They asked about her work history, which she carefully edited, omitting the gaps and focusing on transferable skills from past retail and temp jobs, her organizational abilities, and her proficiency with basic office software. Clara answered honestly, emphasizing her diligence and quick learning ability, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. Just as the interview seemed to be concluding, the door opened, and Nathaniel Pierce walked in. Not the hoodie-clad stranger from the plane, but the man whose face occasionally graced business magazines, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, radiating an aura of quiet authority. Clara's breath caught in her throat. He offered the interviewers a nod, then turned his gaze to her. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by confusion, then a dawning, horrified understanding. Dr. Pierce, MS. Jenkins said, standing respectfully. MS. Evans, this is Nathaniel Pierce, the CEO of Pierce Industries and founder of the Pierce Foundation. Nathaniel dismissed the others with a subtle gesture. Once they were alone, the silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. The man on the plane, Clara whispered, her mind racing. The nomination. It was you. Nathaniel met her gaze directly. Yes, I saw you needed assistance. I wanted to offer an opportunity, not charity. Color flooded Clara's face, a mixture of humiliation and anger. Assistance? You followed me? You investigated me. The idea that this powerful man had pried into her precarious existence felt like a violation. I don't need your pity, Dr. Pierce. I've managed on my own for 4 years, and I'll continue to do so. Her voice trembled slightly, but her chin was high. She stood up, ready to flee. Clara, wait, Nathaniel said, his tone softening. He didn't move closer, respecting her space. My methods were unorthodox. I apologize if I overstepped, but what I saw wasn't weakness, it was strength under duress. I run a multi-billion-dollar company. I recognize potential and resilience. This is a real job, one your skills are suited for, with a salary that reflects its responsibilities. It also comes with resources that could help ensure Ben's stability and safety. He paused, letting his words sink in. My head of security, Mark, conducted a background check after I saw you at the motel. He learned about Mike, about Buffalo. Clara flinched as if struck. The fear she lived with daily surged to the surface. I respect your independence, Nathaniel continued quietly. But Ben deserves a safe place to grow up, doesn't he? Let me provide the opportunity. Whether you succeed is up to you. But the chance and the security that comes with it, I can offer that. The mention of Mike, the explicit offer of safety for Ben, it chipped away at her pride. She sank back into the chair, conflicted. She hated feeling like a project, a charity case. But the thought of a steady income, of maybe finally feeling secure, for Ben's sake, could she afford not to accept? What exactly is the job? She asked, her voice barely audible. Nathaniel outlined the role, an administrative assistant position in the foundation's department, coordinating logistics for community events, managing schedules, and handling correspondence. It required organization and discretion, skills she possessed. The salary he quoted was more than triple what she'd ever earned. Complication 1. Clara accepted, but with deep reservations. On a trial basis, she insisted. And I earn my keep. No special treatment. Nathaniel agreed. She started the following Monday, navigating the corporate environment with a mixture of determination and anxiety. She kept her distance from Nathaniel, maintaining strict professionalism, though their paths occasionally crossed in the executive wing. Complication 2. The work itself was demanding but manageable. Clara proved meticulous and efficient, quickly mastering the scheduling software and earning quiet praise from MS Jenkins. However, the disparity between her life and the world she now worked in was jarring. She still returned each night to the grim motel, stretching every dollar, while her colleagues discussed weekend trips and expensive restaurants. Nathaniel, respecting her wish for no special treatment, kept his distance personally, but he received regular updates from MS Jenkins on Clara's performance and discreet reports from Mark on her situation outside of work. Complication 3. The fragile stability was shattered a month later. Clara received a block call on her burner phone. "Found you, Clara," a gravelly voice whispered Mike's voice. "Chicago's a big city, but not big enough. Think a fancy job can protect you? Think again. I'm coming for my boy." Click. Terror seized Clara. He'd found her. How? Had he seen her? Was he close? She almost threw up from fear. Shaking, she immediately called the only person she could think of who might understand the gravity of the situation. She requested an urgent, private meeting with Nathaniel Pierce. The fragile barrier between employer and employee was about to crumble. Clara sat rigidly in the plush armchair opposite Nathaniel's expansive desk, the skyline of Chicago stretching out behind him like an indifferent backdrop. The luxurious office felt like a cage. She'd recounted Mike's call, her voice tight with suppressed panic. The bravado she'd clung to, the insistence on independence, felt like a foolish luxury now. Ben's safety was paramount. Nathaniel listened intently, his expression grim. He didn't offer platitudes or minimize her fear. When she finished, he leaned forward, his gaze steady and serious. "This changes things, Clara. The motel isn't safe. Not anymore." He'd already anticipated this possibility, contingency plans swirling in the back of his mind since Mark's initial report. "I want you and Ben to move." Immediately, Clara recoiled slightly. "Move where? I can't afford." Pierce Industries maintains several secure corporate apartments for visiting executives and personnel requiring discreet accommodation. Nathaniel interrupted smoothly, though his eyes held a deeper concern. "They are fully furnished, equipped with state-of-the-art security systems, monitored 24/7 by my team. There's a 2-bedroom unit available in a building downtown, not far from here. It's anonymous, secure, and available now." This was the line she had dreaded crossing, accepting not just a job, but shelter, direct protection. It felt like surrender. "Dr. Pierce, Nathaniel, I appreciate the offer, truly, but taking an apartment from the company, it feels It feels necessary, he finished firmly but gently. This isn't about charity, Clara. It's about risk management. You are a valued employee. He saw her flicker of skepticism, but continued. And more importantly, you and your son are facing a credible threat. My security team's primary concern now is ensuring your safety. That motel is a liability we can't afford. He paused, his voice dropping slightly. I grew up in the foster system, bounced around homes, never knew where I'd be next week. I know what instability feels like, what fear feels like. I won't let Ben live like that. Looking over his shoulder, if I have the power to prevent it. His admission, the crack in his professional armor revealing a glimpse of shared vulnerability, struck a chord deep within Clara. He wasn't just a billionaire playing savior. He understood the primal fear of insecurity, the ache for a safe haven. Looking into his eyes, she saw not pity, but a fierce, protective resolve rooted in genuine empathy. The fear for Ben overwhelmed her pride. Tears welled, blurring the cityscape. Okay, she whispered, the word thick with emotion. Okay, for Ben. Shift in Clara. This was her point of no return. By accepting Nathaniel's protection, moving into the secure apartment under his watch, she was placing her trust in Ben's life squarely in his hands. The wary employee facade crumbled, replaced by a raw vulnerability and a hesitant reliance on this man who had unexpectedly become her shield. She was no longer just reacting to circumstance. She was actively choosing safety, even if it meant dependence. Shift in Nathaniel. The moment Clara accepted, Nathaniel felt a profound sense of responsibility settle over him, heavier and more personal than any business deal. This wasn't just about fixing a problem anymore. It was about protecting these two specific people who had somehow breached his carefully guarded world. Arranging the move, coordinating with Mark's security team, briefing the building's discreet concierge, he threw himself into it with focused intensity. Seeing Clara and Ben later that day, stepping into the clean, safe, anonymous apartment Ben exploring wide-eyed, Clara looking around with a mixture of awe and trepidation solidified his commitment. He was no longer just an employer or a benefactor. He was invested in their future. Revelation/confrontation. That evening, after Ben had fallen asleep in his own room for the first time in years, Clara found Nathaniel still there, conferring quietly with a plainclothes security guard near the entrance. When the guard left, an awkward silence fell. "Thank you," Clara said softly, gesturing around the apartment. "This is more than I ever imagined." Nathaniel simply nodded. Then, hesitantly, Clara began to talk. Really talk. Not just about the recent threat, but about the years with Mike, the insidious control that started long before the physical violence, the isolation, the fear, the escape. She spoke of the constant struggle, the shame, the crushing weight of protecting Ben alone. Nathaniel listened, his usual impassivity replaced by a deep, quiet attention. When she finally fell silent, exhausted and emotionally raw, he spoke, his voice low. He didn't share details, but he spoke of the fear in certain foster homes, the gnawing hunger, the feeling of being utterly powerless, the fierce determination it forged in him to never be helpless again. It wasn't a comparison of suffering, but a shared understanding of trauma's long shadow. In that shared vulnerability, the last vestiges of the employer-employee dynamic dissolved, replaced by something deeper, more complex, and undeniably human. The foundation for trust, and perhaps something more, was finally laid. Life settled into a new, albeit tense, rhythm. The secure apartment became a sanctuary. For the first time in years, Ben slept through the night without nightmares. He started attending a nearby preschool, vetted and monitored by Nathaniel's security team. Clara continued her work at the Pierce Foundation, excelling now that the constant anxiety of precarious housing was lifted. Her interactions with Nathaniel became more frequent, evolving beyond mere professional necessity. He often checked in, ostensibly about work or security updates, but their conversations increasingly drifted into personal territory. They discovered shared tastes in simple things: quiet evenings, old movies, takeout pizza eaten on the floor, while Ben chattered about his day. Nathaniel found himself making excuses to visit the apartment, bringing small, thoughtful gifts, a new art set for Ben, a specific brand of tea Clara had casually mentioned liking. He saw the guardedness in her eyes slowly recede, replaced by a hesitant warmth. He became a regular fixture in their small world, a stable, gentle male presence Ben quickly gravitated towards. The boy, initially shy, started calling him Nate, running to greet him at the door. Witnessing Ben's easy affection, his gradual transformation from a withdrawn, anxious child into a more confident, playful boy, stirred unfamiliar emotions in Nathaniel. He hadn't realized how starved he was for genuine connection, for the simple rhythms of family life, however unconventional their arrangement. However, the shadow of Mike lingered. Mark's team worked diligently, tracking Mike's movements, intercepting increasingly agitated emails and veiled threats sent through obscure online channels. Mike was smart, careful not to make direct, actionable threats immediately, but his obsession was clear. He was circling, probing for weaknesses. Security protocols tightened. A discreet bodyguard accompanied Clara during her commute and was stationed unobtrusively near the apartment building. Nathaniel arranged for Clara to consult with top-tier family law attorneys specializing in domestic violence cases to explore options for a permanent restraining order. But Mike's lack of a fixed address and his careful avoidance of direct confrontation made serving him difficult and proving immediate danger legally challenging. The tension spiked one rainy Tuesday. Clara was picking Ben up from preschool. As she buckled him into his car seat, a man bumped into her hard, knocking her purse to the ground. He mumbled an apology, helped gather the scattered contents, and disappeared quickly into the crowd. He looked ordinary, unremarkable, but as Clara got into the car, her hand brushed against something unfamiliar tucked into a side pocket of her purse: a single, wilted black rose and a small, folded note. Her blood ran cold. The note contained only 3 words: soon. Very soon. Her bodyguard, alerted by her distress, quickly scanned the area, but the man was gone. Shaken, Clara immediately reported the incident. Mark's team reviewed security footage, identifying the man, but finding no immediate criminal record or known association with Mike, likely a low-level associate hired to deliver the message, to instill fear. It worked. The incident shattered Clara's fragile sense of security. That night, curled up on the couch after Ben was asleep, the fear overwhelmed her. "Maybe I should just go," she whispered to Nathaniel, who had come over immediately after hearing the news. "Take Ben and disappear again. Somewhere he can't find us. I'm putting you, your company, everyone in danger." This was her dark night of the soul. The moment the weight felt too heavy, the fear too consuming. Nathaniel sat beside her, not touching, but his presence a solid anchor. "No, Clara," he said firmly. "Running isn't the answer. Not this time. Running means he keeps control. He keeps you living in fear. We knew this might escalate. We have resources, we have plans. You're not alone in this anymore. We face him together." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "I won't let him take Ben. I won't let him terrorize you. This ends here." His unwavering conviction, the quiet strength in his voice, steadied her. He wasn't just offering protection. He was offering partnership. She leaned her head against his shoulder, just as she had on the plane, but this time it wasn't exhaustion. It was trust. The incident, terrifying as it was, galvanized their resolve. The legal team redoubled their efforts, using the Black Rose incident as evidence of escalating harassment and stalking. Mark's team intensified surveillance on Mike's known associates and digital footprint, searching for a mistake, a concrete piece of evidence that would allow for decisive legal action. They knew a confrontation was inevitable. Mike was getting bolder, more desperate. They prepared for the final move, strengthening security around Clara and Ben, coordinating with law enforcement, and finalizing their legal strategy. The air crackled with anticipation and dread. The final confrontation was no longer a question of if, but when. The when arrived 3 days later, not with a bang, but with calculated precision. Mark's team, tracking Mike's digital breadcrumbs and monitoring his known associates, learned he had purchased a specific burner phone and was planning to approach the preschool area again, likely hoping to intimidate Clara or even attempt to grab Ben during the chaotic pickup time. Working swiftly with the Chicago PD, who were now fully briefed and cooperative thanks to the evidence provided by Nathaniel's legal team and the recent incident report, they set a trap. They decided against a direct confrontation near the school, deeming it too risky for the children. Instead, they allowed Mike to believe his plan was undetected. Plainclothes officers and Nathaniel security personnel saturated the area around the preschool, blending in with parents and pedestrians. Clara, briefed and secured, arrived with her bodyguard, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. As predicted, Mike appeared, lurking near a corner coffee shop, watching the school entrance intently. He didn't approach Clara directly this time. Instead, as she walked back towards her car with Ben, whose hand she held tightly, Mike made his move towards them. Before he could get within 20 feet, 2 plainclothes officers intercepted him smoothly, flanking him. "Michael Tanner," one asked calmly but firmly. Mike, visibly startled, his eyes darting around, realizing the setup. "Police. We need you to come with us." Mike's face contorted with rage. "You can't do this. She's lying. That kid is mine." He lunged, not toward the officers, but trying to break past them towards Clara and Ben. It was a desperate, foolish move. The officers subdued him quickly and efficiently, handcuffing him as he spewed venomous threats towards Clara. "You bitch. You think he can protect you forever? I'll get out. I'll always find you." Clara stood frozen for a moment, watching them lead Mike away. Ben hid behind her legs, frightened by the shouting. Nathaniel, who had been watching from an unmarked car nearby with Mark, quickly approached. He knelt beside Ben, speaking reassuringly, while his eyes met Clara's over the boy's head. In her eyes, he saw not just fear, but the dawning light of liberation. She had faced him indirectly, and he had been stopped. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. The arrest, coupled with the documented stalking, threats, and violation of a newly issued emergency protective order the legal team had secured just hours before based on his planned approach, ensured Mike would face serious charges and significant jail time. The immediate threat was neutralized, contained by the system they had trusted. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Clara, supported by Nathaniel and his lawyers, provided testimony. The evidence against Mike was overwhelming: the documented threats, the stalking incident with the Rose, the attempted approach near the preschool violating the protective order. He was ultimately convicted on multiple counts, including stalking and violating a protective order, receiving a substantial prison sentence followed by strict, long-term probation conditions that included mandatory counseling and a permanent restraining order covering Clara and Ben across state lines. The legal system, often slow and frustrating, had finally provided a shield. Life gradually found its true, new normal. The constant, gnawing fear that had shadowed Clara for years began to recede, replaced by a sense of security she hadn't thought possible. She continued to work at the Pierce Foundation, thriving in her role and becoming a passionate advocate internally for supporting community programs aimed at helping domestic violence survivors. Nathaniel, seeing her passion and lived experience, eventually funded a new initiative within the foundation, Clara's Haven, focused on providing emergency relocation assistance and job placement support for women fleeing abusive situations. Clara didn't run it single-handedly, but she played a key role in its development and outreach, offering insights and empathy that no one else could. The bond between Clara and Nathaniel deepened into a quiet, steady love built on mutual respect, shared vulnerability, and the unique crucible of their shared experience. There was no dramatic proposal on a private plane. Instead, one ordinary Tuesday evening, as they watched Ben sleep, Nathaniel simply took her hand. "We make a good team, Clara Evans," he said softly. "What do you say we make it official?" Tears welled in Clara's eyes, tears of relief, gratitude, and love. "Yes, Nate," she whispered. "Yes." They married quietly a few months later. Nathaniel legally adopted Ben, giving him the stable, loving father figure he deserved. Their life wasn't a fairy tale. Clara still carried the scars of her past, and Nathaniel wrestled with the ingrained habits of his solitary existence, but it was real, grounded, and filled with a hard-won peace. Occasionally, Clara would think back to that turbulent flight, falling asleep on a stranger's shoulder out of sheer exhaustion. She hadn't found a prince, but a partner. She hadn't been rescued, but empowered. And Nathaniel, the solitary billionaire who thought he needed nothing, found that in offering shelter, he had built himself a home. They had adjusted their altitudes, finding love, family, and purpose not despite the turbulence, but because of it.